Alliance of Canada.
Welcome back, everyone. 13 after the hour, and time for us to go behind the headlines where a Texas lawmaker has filed a marijuana decriminalization bill. That was just today when Texas State Representative Joe Moody, who's a Democrat from El Paso, proposed a new law downgrading possession of an ounce or less of marijuana to just a $100 civil fine. Possession of 2 ounces or less of marijuana is currently a criminal offense in the Lone Star State, leading to arrest, up to 6 months in jail and a $2,000 fine, and a lifelong criminal record. At the press conference this morning, Representative Moody said, quote, "Our current marijuana policy in Texas just isn't working. We need a new approach that allows us to more effectively utilize our limited criminal justice resources. This legislation is a much-needed step in the right direction," end quote. Now, some of you might be shocked to hear of marijuana reform happening in such a conservative state, but for a few years now, Texas has been a hotbed of marijuana activism. Normal chapters in Dallas-Fort Worth, Austin, Houston, San Antonio, and Waco have been raising awareness of the need for reform in Texas for over a decade now. I've visited the state many times since 2011. I've gotten to meet a lot of these reformers in person, and their dedication to marijuana law reform is to be congratulated and admired. They do face a lot of headwind in Texas. They got a lot of opposition and a lot of conservatism in this very religious state. So kudos to them for all the work they've been doing. One of the things they've been putting on is the Texas Regional Marijuana Conference. And at this conference, the last conference I was at, octogenarian Ann Lee announced the formation of Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition. 84-year-old woman. She's the mother of Richard Lee, who put up $1.5 million of his own money to run California's Prop 19 legalization campaign all the way back in 2010. That got this whole ball rolling for the rest of the country. Ann Lee was at the press conference representing Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition. She said, quote, "There is broad support for reducing marijuana possession penalties, and it spans the political spectrum. The prohibition of marijuana is diametrically opposed to the Republican principles of limited government, individual responsibility, and personal freedom. There is nothing conservative about it," end quote. Now, Mrs. Lee was joined by retired Texas District Court Judge and guest on our show, John Delaney, who's a speaker for Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Judge Delaney said, quote, "Giving a ticket for small amounts of marijuana makes sense. The fine can be paid by mail, so police, prosecutors, and our courts will be able to use their limited resources for more important matters," end quote. Now, the grassroots efforts of these Texas activists have been greatly aided by some very brave politicians, like former El Paso City Councilman Beto O'Rourke, who in 2009 led his city council in a unanimous vote to begin an open and honest debate on the war on drugs. In 2012, O'Rourke went on to defeat an 8-term congressman who attacked him for his pro-marijuana legalization stance. He currently serves in the U.S. House of Representatives, having won re-election in 2014 with 2/3 of the vote. It's no surprise that State Representative Moody, like U.S. Representative O'Rourke, would offer their voices from El Paso, Texas, in support of statewide decriminalization. El Paso sits across the border from Juarez, Mexico, where some of the most brutal and constant violence of the Mexican drug war takes place. Homicides, driven by the war between the Sinaloa and Juarez cartels, peaked at over 3,500 in 2010, but have steadily declined to less than 500 homicides in 2013. Now, it's not surprising that Texans would be ready to accept marijuana decriminalization. According to the FBI's Uniform Crime Report, there were over 72,000 arrests for marijuana in Texas in 2013, even though in 2007 the state legislature passed a bill allowing local governments to use a summons for marijuana offenses rather than an arrest. And out of those 72,000 marijuana arrests in Texas, an astounding 97% of them were for mere possession of marijuana only. Meanwhile, according to the FBI's Uniform Crime Reports, 90% of all burglaries and 88% of all car thefts in Texas went unsolved in 2013. It's no wonder Texans are beginning to call for some changes in their marijuana policies when real crime is running rampant in the Lone Star State. And it's showing in the polls. A recent poll by the Marijuana Policy Project showed that 61% of Texans would support a decriminalization effort similar to what Representative Moody is proposing. This is one of 3 proposals, and I believe probably the one with the most chance of making it through the Texas legislature. Governor Rick Perry there in Texas is somewhat against decriminalization, having said that 2007 change has pretty much already decriminalized in Texas, but the results show that it hasn't taken that turn. It's not really decriminalized when the summons is still for a criminal court, and the summons can still lead to an arrest and still lead to a criminal record. That was one of those half measures that a legislature often will try to take to blunt, if you'll pardon the pun, to try to blunt some of the support for marijuana legalization or decrim. Pass a half measure that takes all of the attention away from the issue, just like Governor Schwarzenegger in California did with decrim during Richard Lee's Prop 19 campaign. Pass a little bit of what the people want, and maybe they won't keep asking for all of what they want. But I don't think Texans are fooled. I think they realize that the arrests are still happening if they live anywhere outside of the Austin, Texas area. And they realize that every person that is arrested and jailed and given a criminal record is money that is paid by the taxpayers of Texas to fund those cops, courts, rehabs, and drug tests. It's